Think about how much information you were exposed to when you were a child and compare it to how much information our children are exposed to now. They're being overwhelmed in many cases.
Welcome to the Dad Central Show, the podcast that helps overwhelmed dads conquer stress, build confidence, and become the father their family brags about. Join Drew Solon, a leadership coach and father of 5, and Ed Gow Jr., a fatherhood advocate and contributor to the Good Men Project, as we guide you through the journey of fatherhood. We'll show you how to connect deeply with your family, manage your time and energy better, and master tools to become the dad you want to be. Let's get started.
What if the biggest factor in whether your child comes to you with life's hardest questions isn't having the right answers, but knowing they're safe to ask you? Research consistently shows that young people who feel that they have at least one trusted adult they can talk to experience better mental health, greater resilience, and are more likely to seek help when facing challenges. For dads, that means your role isn't to have every answer about gender, identity, relationships, or life. It's to be the kind of parent your child knows they can come to without fear of being dismissed, shamed, or rejected. Today's conversation is about becoming that safe place. So as always, you're hanging out with us on Dad Central, a parenting podcast to reduce stress and build confidence in fatherhood. And we'd love to get your questions. We'd love to answer some of your questions about parenting, dadhood, et cetera, et cetera. So feel free to email us at podcast@dadcentral.ca. So today we are going to be talking about gender, identity, and big questions, being a safe dad to talk to on the Dad Central Show. Drew, thoughts on this?
To me, the idea of being a safe place to talk to is so crucial. And it's something that personally I'm working on. It's funny. On the weekend, I had like a moment. And I called Kristen because I was driving to Toronto to see Jordan's baseball game. And I said, hey, I feel like I don't make it safe for some of the more difficult emotions, not only for you, but for the kids. Like, what are your thoughts? Can you think about that? And then we'll talk about it later. So I think it's timely and relevant that we're having the conversation, just because it's also relevant for me as well. But hopefully listeners will get some value out of what we share today, because that piece of being a trusted adult, I think is so crucial as our kids grow. Life and the world that they're entering is becoming more and more complex and challenging, and being able to be a resource for them as they're going out, taking the next steps, confronting new challenges. To me, I couldn't think of a more valuable role that I would love to play in my kids' life as they grow. So I'm assuming some of our listeners would feel the same way. So if you're a listener and that resonates for you, then stick with us. We hope that you'll get some value. At least one thing you can apply today, because that is our goal and why we do this show.
All right. Well, we're going to cover some topics today on this show. One, why this matters. Also, what makes a dad safe. Then, when you don't know what to say. And then finally, building trust over time. Drew, let's kick it off on why does this matter?
Well, what kids are exposed to these days presents opportunities where they blurt things out, or they ask you something, or they see it on screen, and it's a jumping off point for them to have a grounding in something that will hopefully build their capacity, as opposed to leave them with more questions. So, kids are asking these questions earlier than the previous generations. Part of this exposure, social media that we talked about in our last episode, really exposes them to a lot of different conflicting, bombarding, challenging ideas and opinions, and they need a way to sort through that. And a lot of young people are trying to understand themselves, right, while navigating this whole peer pressure and the reality of the world that we're in. So I think that's really why it matters. And so we're going to share some of the research highlights that really speaks to this. And a strong parent-child relationship is one of the greatest protective factors for youth mental health. Young people who experience open, supportive communication with parents are more likely to seek guidance before making significant decisions. And feeling heard by parents builds trust, even when parents and children don't agree. And I think that's the really crucial piece. Even when they don't agree, there's still trust there. And that is, to me, the ultimate goal of my parenting role. So, safety for us, and when we want to talk about, doesn't mean agreement. It means your child trusts that they'll be heard and that their opinions and their views matter.
And I just want to add one more thing in regards to why this matters. And everyone who's watching or listening this, think about how much information you were exposed to when you were a child and compare it to how much information our children are exposed to now. That's why it matters, because it's so much more. And probably on average, the average child's brain can only process the same amount over the age. They have so much more information. They're being, I want to say exposed to, overwhelmed in many cases. So this is why it matters. So as we move on to our next section, what makes a dad safe, Drew?
Yeah, good points for us to talk through here. We'll give it to you pretty quickly, and then maybe Ed, you and I can go back and forth just on a little bit of a conversation. But very practically, a safe dad listens before responding. He stays calm during difficult conversations. He asks thoughtful questions. He avoids quick lectures. He admits when he doesn't know something, and he separates his child's worth from the topic they're discussing. So, did anything jump out to you, Ed, on that list?
I think that one thing that hits my alleged mind here is the whole area of patience. Patience. I think it's a really key thing in life, but especially when raising children, that we have to realize that they don't move most in the same speed that we do. So we have to have that patience and listening, and not only listening to what they say, listening to what they don't say, and listening also on what they do and what they don't do. I think also questions like, can you tell me more? What makes you think like that? Being curious in a good way and being patient are, I think, those things that I always say, providing that safe and brave space, that can not only be done by verbal, but also nonverbal communication and actions. So I think those are some things that I bring to the table as you ask me that question to add on to.
Yeah. This is where I'm going to go back into my story. One of the things that I've noticed about myself, I have strong opinions. And sometimes those strong opinions relate to quick responses or quick judgments. And sometimes I'll put them out there very quickly, not argumentatively, not hopefully not rudely. I'd have to ask, Kristen and the kids, but because I feel very strongly about it, and they're often values based type of perspectives. But what I recognize is sometimes what I need to do, and I think the principle is right, but as Kristen often tells me, Drew, you're absolutely right, but your delivery was off. And so I'm sure I'm not the only dad who's like that. And I mention it because really I think the step one before I can do this list of listen before responding, staying calm, asking thoughtful questions is I have to recognize what's going on for me. And sometimes one of the things that's going on is it's fear that my kids are being influenced in the wrong way. And I really don't want that. Sometimes it's helplessness that, as much as I'm doing, I feel like I'm not able to counter the fact that I'm hearing this type of perspective or I'm seeing this type of behavior from my kids. And so my quick reactions really before I need to be able to manage myself before I then even enter into that. And so that's just, I think, one of the challenges in that, I think I'm very positive about this if a question is brought to me. But if I see something, and this is a place for me to be more curious, sometimes I will unwittingly make a statement that might shut things down. At least that's what I think is going on. And so I just share it there because this is a work in progress, but it's something that I think is so important. And so as I recognize this, I want to be able to make some of these shifts. And I think the internal shift has to happen first before I can practically do some of these things, because some of this is just ingrained in me. And so I got to unlearn it.
I concur and agree with you. I'll add two quick things. Tone is very important, and when a dad's speaking to the kids, and also what state are you in before you communicate or while you're communicating with your children. So, are you in a curious state? Are you in an energetic state? Check your state before you act in whatever way, whether it's verbally, through motion, aggressive, non-aggressive, etc. Checking your state is a very important thing.
Yeah.
Next up, we'll talk about when you don't know what to say. But I thought dads knew everything, Drew.
Well, I'm sure in some areas we probably do know everything.
Okay.
Right? But when we don't know what to say, because sometimes they bring situations or questions, you're like, that's actually a really good question. So again, practically, we'll start by, what we can say if we're going to say something is, hey, that's a really important question. Or, I really like this one, especially if it's brought to you as, thank you for trusting me with this. It sounds like it's really hard for you. You could say, I'd like to understand more, or can we keep talking about this together? Those are all, questions that open up dialogue and create a conversation. I think the reality is that it's okay for us to pause as well. If we don't know the answer or we don't have anything to say, leave a little bit of silence. That's okay. It's hard though sometimes. Right? We always want to feel like we have to jump in or fill in the gaps. We feel like we have to fix sometimes, or we got to solve the problem. Sometimes it's not something to be solved. It's just something to sit with and to be explored. I like to use the analogy of sitting at a table with your child and they put something on the table. Is your immediate response to simply like call out what it is and what you're supposed to do with it and tell them what to do with it? Or is this simply they put it on the table and they're saying, hey, Dad, what do you think of this? Then you can just look at it. You pick it up, you move it around, you do things. And that's like the metaphor of you get curious about it and say, well, here's what I notice, or here's what I see. So it's the idea of let's metaphorically sit down at this table, put it out there together and explore it together. I think that to me is a great way to picture these types of conversations. And then you can essentially in that process demonstrate it's okay for us to learn about this together. It's okay for us to actually come back and leave it here, and we'll come back to the table, let's say tomorrow or next week, and we'll talk more about it then. I think the reality is the more that we can create that metaphorical sitting down together at a table and exploring it, that creates more of a safety. And children, I think they rarely expect perfect answers. How would they even know what a perfect answer is other than it meets them where they're at? And ultimately, they'll remember more of how did they feel in that conversation together. Anything you want to add to there, Ed?
Yeah. Only other thing I'll add is that children really expect perfect answers. They remember how parents made them feel. So again, don't put pressure on yourself being perfect. They just want how to feel, your feeling, your presence. That's what they're looking for. That's the key thing. So I don't have too much more to add on to that. But also it's okay to pause and it's okay to say, I'm not sure, I don't know. That's okay. It's also an opportunity, as Drew said, for yourself and your childhood children to find the answers together. It's a great opportunity. Our final section, building trust over time. Drew?
Well, we know that trust grows through consistency and things like everyday conversations. And how do you manage a daily conversation with them? An important principle, we've talked about this before, is sometimes a conversation might not go well, but how you repair afterwards makes all the difference in the world in terms of bridging that gap and bringing you back to more trust rather than eroding trust over time. I mentioned of showing up consistently, apologizing when necessary. This one is really important. Respecting and not judging any type of emotions. And here's an area of growth for me, in that I tend to respond well when there's, a variety of emotions. But what I'm noticing is that when there are sometimes intense or very negative emotions that I'm experiencing from my kids, or even from Kristen sometimes, I tend to not be as safe, because I feel like I got to shift this negativity into something more constructive. And so that's an area where I'm learning that I think I'm inadvertently making it less safe for some of these harder, intense, really negative emotions. And so that's an area of growth for me. The more that I can respect and create safety in the intensity, I think the better we'll hopefully be able to move through those. But that's the area of me working. One of the greatest things we can ever do is spending one-on-one time together with our children. And it doesn't, like, 10 minutes a day is actually good enough, right? If you're like, how am I going to do that? For me, I've got 5 kids and a blended family. They're all various ages, but all it truly takes to build positive regard and great connection is 10 minutes. Anyone can do that. So small daily moments build the relationship needed for life's biggest conversations.
Well said. Good wrap. Good wrap. So, what did we cover? We talked about why this matters. We also chatted about what makes a dad safe. Then, when you don't know what to say, and then building trust over time. So, some of the takeaways today: your relationship is more important than having perfect answers. Love that. Love that. Listening builds trust faster than lecturing. 100%. Staying calm creates emotional safety. And then curiosity opens conversations that judgment can quickly close. Difficult conversations are rarely one time events, they're ongoing opportunities to strengthen your relationship. And a safe dad is one who is consistently present, willing to listen, and committed to keeping the conversation going. So when children ask difficult questions, they're often asking 2 questions. 1, can I trust you? And 2, will you still love me while we figure this out? So you don't have to be the expert dads. You simply have to stay engaged. So, Drew, what's a resource that we can offer our family today?
The Connected Dad course. This, to me, really focuses on managing our own emotions, which is always step number 1 to building a safe, trusting relationship. Goes deep into connection, listening, understanding, empathy, all right, finding common ground. And ultimately, then it goes into understanding emotions and how do you coach emotions. So the Connected Dad course is a fantastic resource. It's super convenient. It's audible. It's audio lessons you can download and take on the go anywhere. Listen while you're at the gym, while you're working, or while you're doing other things. So Connected Dad course. We'll have a link in the show notes.
Excellent. Before I give our call to action, I haven't said this story in a long time. And because we chatted a lot about trust today, quick little story. A number of years ago, I was watching TV, which I don't do that often. And all of a sudden, I saw The Rock on the screen. I said, okay, let me check this out. And it was a show produced by Oprah Winfrey. And it was just him speaking in front of a camera about his journey. And at the time, he had, I think it was his second wife. I don't know if it was, or it may have been his second wife, but he had a child named Sydney from his previous wife, or his first serious relationship. And one day he was with Sydney chatting, and Sydney's about 13 years old at that time. And all of a sudden, The Rock asked Sydney, what do you love about me, your dad? And she goes, Dad, no, 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 I'm not. And he kept on pressing. And then finally, Sydney said, I trust you. And his emotion when he was sharing that story, he broke out into tears because he said, when I was Sydney's age, the farthest thing in my mind to say is that I trusted my parents. So it's a powerful story. And it's been many years since and it always sticks in my mind. So whenever I hear about dad, fatherhood, and trust, That story always comes up. And if you can look it up on YouTube. It's a great episode. So this leads into our closing call to action. If you've ever worried about saying the wrong thing, this episode will encourage you to focus less on having all the answers and more on building the kind of relationship where your child knows they can always come to you. Trust factor, because that's one of the greatest gifts a dad can give. So as always, we'd like to say thank you for giving the most important thing, your time, to listen or watch. And as always, don't just manage your time, manage your energy. And remember to give yourself grace, and we'll chat with you soon. Be well.